Hi, my name is Tom Benkowski. I'm a director of product marketing here with Netsco. And with me today are two individuals, Richard Hummel, who's a manager of our threat intelligence team known as ACER, and Roland Dobbins, a principal engineer on that team. And today we're going to talk to you about the topic of triple extortion. So let me start with Richard. Richard, we've heard of ransomware. It is obviously a single form of cyber extortion. It's been in the news a lot recently, especially over the last year during the pandemic. But most recently, we've been hearing about this double and even this notion of triple extortion. So, what exactly is triple extortion?
Hey, Tom, thanks. And yeah, you're right. This phenomena has been happening for quite a long time, but more recently, we're seeing this idea of triple extortion. I'm going to get to that in just a moment, but let's walk it back a little bit. When did this kind of first start? And the kind of double extortion idea can actually be traced all the way back to the original type, like banking malware, like Zeus and Game Over Zeus. And back then, you would have things like Game Over Zeus would compromise your computer, they would do wire transfers and compromise your bank accounts, and then as a last ditch effort, they would deploy like CryptoLocker and they encrypt your files. And then guess what? You got to pay a second time. You also have this notion of all of these different remote access Trojans or various other ransomwares where they can actually get into your devices first. That's how they compromise, the initial compromise, whether that's brute force or some other exploitation method. And then they'll get in there, they'll take all of your files, then they'll encrypt them. And it used to be that that was kind of the extent of it. They had all your files, they encrypted them. So first you got to pay to decrypt your files. Oh, and then guess what? I'm going to push your stuff publicly unless you also pay me. And so some of the types of data they would target is like PII, or they would go after hospitals or education or local governments, and they would steal data that's sensitive in nature. Even commercial entities, when you're talking about different PII for their core products or whatever it might be, you don't want that stuff posted freely publicly online for anybody to access and view or purchase. More recently, we're seeing a lot of adversaries start to incorporate DDoS into this as kind of a third tier. And so we have ransomware families like SunCrypt back in October. Even before that, you had Maze ransomware back in September. Then you have Ragnar Locker, which was also in October. Even more recently, everybody has heard about the Colonial Pipeline incident and ransomware. Well, maybe what you haven't heard is that the dark side crew that was perpetrating that attack actually started offering DDoS as part of their toolkit in April of this year. And so you have these adversaries where they're deploying DDoS. And what happens now is you have ransomware deployed. I'm gonna extort you for Bitcoin payment for that. And then I'm gonna say, unless you pay me, I'm gonna post your stuff publicly. Well, now you have this threat of DDoS. Okay, I've encrypted your files. I'm threatening you with public disclosure. And now I'm going to take your services and your devices offline, whatever's left. And unless you pay me, I'm not going to stop those attacks. And so you have this triple extortion, and you have lots and lots of systems that are already down. Now you're taking down their network. So you're basically eliminating somebody's livelihood, their business, their bottom line. And that's this idea of triple extortion. Back to you, Tom.
Excellent, excellent. Roland, you've been in this field for over 20 years, so stopping or researching DDoS attacks, and most recently we've been looking at DDoS extortion attacks. But ransomware and DDoS, two very distinct types of attacks, right? However, they seem to have a lot of similarities as well. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about those?
Well, that's exactly right, Tom. And so the interesting part about the confluence, as it were, between DDoS and ransomware is that DDoS is a direct attack upon availability, and the ransomware, of course, uses methods to compromise machines inside an organization. So it falls kind of under the rubric of confidentiality and integrity, but then it encrypts everything, and so again renders it unavailable. So that's kind of a hybrid sort of attack using these compromise mechanisms to effectuate what is essentially a broad denial of service. And of course, DDoS attacks take place typically across the internet, and they're designed to make sure that online properties, application services, and data and so forth are inaccessible. And so the concepts behind them, making an organization unable to perform its business task or to achieve its mission, are in fact the same. And with DDoS extortion, the idea, of course, is to extract a payment in exchange for halting the attack. Now, the really interesting part is that DDoS extortion is the single oldest form of extortion on the internet. It actually started in the late 80s and early 1990s on IRC networks, back when there was the where scene where people would pirate commercial software and trade them and have IRC channels, and they have battles over who controls the IRC channels. And so that's where botnets came from. That's where DDoS really came from. We started to see monetary DDoS extortion against enterprise organizations and even ISPs starting around 1997, 1998 timeframe. And of course, here at NetScout Arbor, we've been in the DDoS business for 21 years, I think longer than just about anybody else. And we've been dealing with DDoS extortion the entire time. And so a really key point is that all the things that you need to do to prepare to be able to withstand a DDoS attack and maintain availability in the face of attack, things like having a response team, having a plan, technical defenses, network segmentation, network access policies, the ability to have visibility into traffic on the network, having a mitigation plan, having both an internal and an external communications plan and a recovery plan. There are many, many points of similarity between them. And so if an organization can take the steps that are necessary to prepare to deal with a DDoS attack, then they're halfway there to being able to deal with ransomware, and vice versa as well. And since we especially see both the operational and the technical convergence between the DDoS extortion and the ransomware type of extortion, I think it really behooves organizations to form a security team that is focused on the availability mission that takes both of these different types of threats into account and makes sure that the processes, procedures, architectures, and operational practices and communication plans are there as part of their business continuity planning.
Okay, great. So let's wrap it up here. In a brief, 30-second or so summary, if you had to give organizations one word of advice, if they are indeed experiencing a triple extortion attack, what would that be? Pose it to Richard first.
Yeah, so the main things here is going to be preparation and awareness. And Roland's already covered a whole number of things, such as like having the right teams in place, looking at certain security postures, network segmentation, all of those typical best common practices, either for just general network hygiene, as well as preventing DDoS attacks. But in the case of ransomware, one of the key components here is understanding how adversaries actually get into a network. Because there's a couple of different ways that they do this, and they're tried and true. In fact, even in the recent stuff with the Colonial Pipeline, there's a lot of kind of hypothesis about how they got in, but the crew themselves, typically the way they do it is they will brute force network access credentials, and they will deploy something called Cobalt Strike, which is a typical remote access Trojan that's publicly available. And they use that for command and control to download additional software. Now, the other side of this is that social engineering or spam messaging is a key way that adversaries, especially in the criminal world, actually deploy their malware samples. So having a good security awareness and understanding how adversaries are getting in is going to go a long way. Now, if you recognize that against your industry, against organizations of your type, maybe brute forcing is the predominant way that they get in. Well, that should inform you what you need to do as far as security benchmarking. You need to ensure that you're patching. You need to ensure that you don't have those security holes. If you're using RDP, if you're using SSH or Telnet, should those be exposed publicly to the internet? Maybe, maybe not. If so, you need to lock them down. You need to make sure that you have multi-factor authentication in place. There's a whole number of things that you can do there. If it's social engineering that's being used, well, you need to implement a security awareness program. You need to have constant training. You need to teach people to recognize what a malicious link looks like, what malicious attachments look like in emails. And that awareness is going to go a long way from preventing these types of infections that won't crypto files.
Excellent. Roland?
Right. So again, Richard made a lot of really great points here. And to add to that as well, from the DDoS perspective, awareness is key, situational awareness is key, and understanding your risk is key. And that includes understanding your entire application and service and content delivery chain, including your partners. Because one of the things about DDoS attacks that we see is not only the targeted organization, can be effective, but you can have a very broad collateral damage footprint. That is true for DDoS attacks attacks is also true for ransomware, because in this multifaceted global economy that we have today, organizations have both physical and logical interdependencies that they use to deliver products and services. And so part of the risk profiling and as part of business continuity planning an organization has to do is to say, well, number one, are we prepared to deal with a DDoS attack? Are we prepared to get assistance from our upstream transit providers, our managed security service providers reaching out to the operational community? Are we prepared to deal with a ransomware attack? Have we done everything we can to prevent it? And if one still takes place, do we have backups in place and a rapid recovery plan? But they also have to take into account what happens when a critical business partner is hit by a high impact DDoS attack that has a negative impact on extranet type services that are vital to your own organization's ability to provide services to customers. What happens if your partner is hit by a ransomware attack? All these contingencies have to be taken into account. This all falls under the rubric of business continuity planning. And it's very important that the folks in business continuity planning understand that these man-made disasters, as it were, are just as important as things like fire, flood, tornado, hurricanes, and that sort of thing as well. So that the entire scope of impediments to maintaining the business fall under the business continuity planning, and that there is a plan to keep services running irrespective of what's actually happening both internally and externally.
Excellent. So being prepared, being aware, right? Having a plan, that's the bottom line. Nothing new here, right? Something we've been professing for years, but it kind of comes to the head when you're in this situation. For more information, well, first of all, thank you very much, Richard and Roland, for all that information. We will be sharing more information about triple extortion attacks and upcoming events and so on. For media information, you can visit netscout.com/extortion, where you'll again learn more information about the triple extortion attacks and other types of attacks, and ways that NetScout Solutions can help you in this situation. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for attending today. Stay tuned.